So I'm speaking with composer Jeff Russo, who has quickly demonstrated his versatility by doing amazing work on films like About Cherry and Free Ride. He has also scored series like Necessary Roughness, Hostages, and his most recent project, the critically acclaimed Fargo, inspired by the classic film from the Coen brothers. Jeff, thank you so much for speaking today.
Thanks for having me.
So to start, I would love to know how you got involved in music, and at what point did you decide that you wanted to do composing for film and television?
It's an interesting story actually. About 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I was asked to act in a movie, and then the director asked me to come in and play on the score. Because they knew I was a guitar player, and I said I'd be happy to. So I went and I met the composer who asked me to play some stuff, and I was just sort of enamored with the whole process, being in the studio, looking at picture, and having to figure out how to play and what to play based on what you saw in the picture, and it was just really, really interesting to me. And that's, I think, when I got the bug, and sort of wanted to do it from that point. And I didn't really then get into it until about 3 years later. But I think that's where the desire began, just being a part of the creation of the score of this particular movie.
Right. So I'd love to jump right into Fargo, which is an amazing series. It's one of my favorite films, and I was skeptical about this whole series being done, but then I watched a pilot and I was like, wow, it's amazing. So tell me about the first time you met with showrunner Noah Hawley, and how did he pitch the show to you, and how did he want you to kind of take on the music?
Well, my relationship with Noah predates Fargo.
Okay.
I did. The first show he created for television was called The Unusuals, in 2009, and I met with him on that show after submitting a reel and doing a demo, and I flew to New York and met with him, and we really sort of hit it off creatively, and he hired me to do that show, and then I've done all the shows that he's done since then. So about a year ago, we were chatting about where we were talking about that, and he told me that he was asked to develop a television version of Fargo, and immediately I was like, okay, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard, because I loved the movie, obviously,
right?
And I was like, what do you want me to do? Do you tell me how should I approach this? And then we talked about the vibe and the tone that he wanted. And the main thing was, he said, I need it to sound cold and lonesome. And I, that day, went back and wrote music in what would become the theme for the television show.
Right. And I think one of the most iconic parts of the original film is, of course, Carter Burwell's score. And, most composers I speak to always try to distance themselves from anything that came before it if they're working on a franchise or a sequel. But it sounds like you kind of embraced Carter Burwell's score here and then kind of try to make it your own sound. Is that kind of how you looked at it?
It's interesting. Yes, I feel like part of the job was to embrace the tone of the movie while trying to make a new story. So embracing the tone of his score was part of the thing. So which sort of led me to doing an orchestral score as opposed to a non-orchestral score.
Right.
And these sort of big, very sort of muscular and beautiful passages of strings and woodwinds. So in that way, embracing the tone of the movie was sort of the number one priority, without trying to be what the movie was.
Right.
It was a very, I feel like it was a very tall order. Like to follow in his footsteps is a big it's a big thing. I'm a big Carter Burwell fan.
Absolutely.
I think he's a really, really great composer, and it's a difficult job to try to do something like that. I mean, we had always known that we wanted to create our own identity for the show.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that was a really important point of not wanting to be copycats, you know?
Right.
I mean, in terms of the show wasn't meant to be a television version of the movie. It was supposed to be, and I think we accomplished it, which is making a show with a new story that lives in that universe.
Right, which I think it's exactly that. That's what I loved about it. It was its own identity, its own voice, and it just felt unique, but it also had that kind of hint of familiarity from that tone and that where the movie came from. And the tone of the film.
And that is exactly what I was tasked to do with the music.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like also the show was tasked to do that with the characters and the story.
Right. And the story, you know, it's very dark, but there's also a quirky humor to it, much like the film. And how do you translate that musically? Or, like, do you kind of back away from those kind of dark comedy moments and kind of just play the more of the drama? Or how do you kind of find that tone to really, you know, translate that into music?
Well, it's interesting, you know, one of the things that I've always done in terms of my work with Noah is if there's something funny, definitely stay away from it musically.
Okay.
Because if you try to play funny, it just sounds like it sounds faked.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't allow the comedy to be what it is, which is truly funny, really in reality sort of funny, even as absurd as the comedy in Fargo can be. If you try to punch that up with music, all of a sudden it just feels like shtick,
right,
and not absurdist.
and that's,
you know?
yeah, that's what I noticed. You do kind of back away from it. If it's anything comedic, you kind of let the editing and let the actors kind of play it out versus pushing the music on it.
Yeah, and in this particular case, the acting is so superb
Amazing.
that there's no reason to have to try to help it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Which frees me up to really just write for the narrative.
And there is actually, I mean, I noticed there's a lot of music in the show, and one of my biggest gripes, I think, with TV these days is lack of music. But I love how much score is utilized in Fargo, you know, and you do balance it with the silence, and it kind of, you find that balance to build tension of you know, silence and score. So how intricate are the spotting sessions for a series like this? You know, every episode is almost like a part of a chapter of the film, a film narrative, and so is it really a detailed kind of spotting session that you guys really hammered out before you go to work?
Well, you know, the workflow on this show is different than anything I've ever done before.
Really?
Yes, and it's interesting that you ask that question because I haven't really talked about this particular thing.
Uh-huh.
But the workflow is, as the first cut comes to Noah, he and the music editor and I will sit down and watch it and just put music in. Like we've never been, like a lot of times, you know, editors will spot music in from wherever, from either the composer's library or from other sources,
right,
just to sort of make the show glued together. But no editors or directors or anybody are putting any music in. The music has always, on this show, been put in by Noah and the music editor and myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I started writing the music for the show so early, I started writing, you know, just before they even had a script.
Wow.
I started writing based on conversations with Noah. By the time they started shooting, I had about 45 minutes or about an hour's worth of music written and recorded.
Wow.
So because of that, the tone, I was trying to set the tone of the music based on the script and based on our conversations. When we went to spot the pilot episode, once we were done, we were just like editing from all these big pieces that I'd written, and it all worked.
That's
So
awesome.
having all the themes and all of those motifs and stuff written prior to having the first episode done really freed me up to be able to write all the new stuff very early. Like I'm writing music to, you know, very much pre-locked picture.
Right.
So like on our first cut, I'll write new music, and then that'll change. So I'm writing and editing at all times, basically. There's no like, here's the show, let's spot it, write the music, record the music, and we're done.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like a full-on movie process where as the edit is changing, the music cues are changing, and the music cues are being re-edited and rewritten and adjusted as we go forward. So we're really doing a movie ethos in a television schedule. It's difficult, but I think it is what is making the end result what it is.
Absolutely, and it's an anthology show, right? So every season's going to be a self-contained story, right?
That's the idea. The idea is this story has an end. Episode 10 is final.
So are you kind of briefed upon how the entire season's going to play out before you started? So do you have like an idea of the character arcs and the narrative before you even began writing, so you know where you're going, or are you kind of taking it as it comes?
Well, that's the part that's interesting, is because I wrote so much of it based on the first and second scripts.
Mm-hmm.
I had an idea as to what the characters were like,
right,
and where they were going to end up, but I didn't know specifics. I didn't know specifics until I read the last script, which was 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So as the characters evolve, I've adapted and changed cues as we go.
Okay.
And then with because I do an orchestra session now every week, I have to adapt those cues sort of in a hurry. Now that we've sort of come to this point where things are going to start happening very quickly.
Right.
So like we'll sit and watch an episode, and we'll say, okay, this theme works really great here. This theme works really great here. Let's do a new version of this theme here. And here we just need a totally new cue because we're going to retire this theme and then bring in something new, since there's this major change that happens here.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically how the whole workflow goes.
So when you do come to those points where you like, okay, let's change the theme or make a variation of the theme, what kind of influences that? What pushes that? Like, are you kind of following the characters, maybe the dialogue or the story? Like, what's really pushing your music into different directions throughout this whole process?
Well, it's really about the character and the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare that I'm playing score during dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
It has happened occasionally in the show, but there are so many long passages of just picture without dialogue,
right,
that I'm really very much able to just write what I'm seeing as opposed to what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now that, I was reading that the Coen brothers got involved after they saw the pilot. So have you gotten any feedback from them at all now that they're as executive producers? Have you talked to them at all?
I don't. I have no contacts with them.
Oh, okay.
I'm solely contacting with Noah.
Which is good.
As the showrunner, he sort of calls the shots. I mean, that's not to say that they don't have whatever notes that they have. I'm not sure what their involvement is on that level.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have any contact with them.
Well, the show itself is amazing, and I know I loved it. I watched the first, the pilot, and it almost felt like the first episode was almost like a film, and I was blown away. So I can't wait to see where the story goes. But to wrap up, I always like to ask composers this one question: if you could score any film ever made, pretending it never has been made before, with no disrespect to the original composer or the score, which film would you choose?
Oh, wow, that's a very interesting question. That's a very interesting question because, like you said, there's no disrespect to the original composer, because obviously they're great.
Right. Yeah.
I would say Shawshank. I would say the Shawshank Redemption.
That's a that's a great choice. I love that.
And there's a number of reasons for that, and that's not the least, which is it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Absolutely.
And one of my favorite scores. It's a really great score. Thomas Newman did a really great mix of that sort of old-timey Americana and film score together. Orchestral thing.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love it.
Which is very interesting to me because I'm a guitar player, so I really do enjoy like hearing a banjo or hearing a mandolin or hearing cool stringed instruments played that way.
Well, I forget who else picked that, but you're not alone in that camp. A few other composers picked Shawshank.
I'm sorry, I just lost you. I lost you there.
I was just saying that a lot of other composers I think picked Shawshank as well. I forget who, but you're not alone in that decision. So
interesting.
But Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. It was amazing to get into that process, because now I think appreciate the show a little bit more, how your workflow was, and it's amazing. Congrats on the ratings and everything. It's a huge success, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. It was a real pleasure.
Be happy to. Thank you very much for having me.